let's go to Kentucky and Kansas State.
Okay.
I'm just going to give you the floor to talk about Kansas State because I have a lot of Kentucky takes that I feel like I need to get off of my chest. And I want to talk about Kansas State first because they won the game and I think they deserve their flowers. I think that the biggest thing that happened in this game, frankly, is something that Jerome Tang said after the game. He said, look, we had more dudes than them. And I agree with them. Keontae Johnson and Marquise Noel are better than anybody on Kentucky. And I know Kentucky fans won't like to hear that about Oscar Tshiebwe, but it's real. And I apologize for it, but it's real. And I think that we saw that today, that when it really comes down to it, those are the dudes that can win you NCAA tournament games. But your thoughts on Kansas State before I jump into a thing on Kentucky here.
Jerome Tang is an unbelievable coach. To construct the roster that he has, to get the buy-in from his players and keep the vibes as immaculate as they have for the last 4 or 5 months is an outstanding coaching job on his part. I think Marquise Noel is probably one of the most underrated players in college basketball and is a really damn good college point guard. The way he facilitates his shooting range, he forces teams to come out and guard him beyond the three-point line, which opens up the rest of the floor for Kansas State. They've got 2 really powerful mismatch wing front court attackers and Keontae Johnson and Naquan Tomlin, who really thrive off of the space that he provides. And then Desi Sills comes in and really plays his role well, knows when to go, when to push tempo, can be a secondary handler when there's a little bit too much attention going to Noel. It's a well thought out team in terms of what Tang brought in and how he wanted to use some of the influences from his time at Baylor to really get this team to play as a cohesive group. They never stop playing hard though. And that's the thing about this Kansas State group is Kentucky can go on runs. They can be physical on the interior. Oscar Tshiebwe can try to post you up possession after possession after possession and have a massive strength advantage. They are not going to stop fighting. And I thought that Naquan Tomlin actually had a pretty solid game on the interior defensively, just in terms of his effort and the way that he was going to continue to fight. Like Oscar is going to get his because Kentucky is going to run so many things through him, and he's going to get a million offensive rebounds. It's just who he is and what he does. But the way that Tomlin fought and the way that Kansas State was able to push in transition to continue to try to run it down their throats and then have a guy who can create in the half court like Noel, Kentucky just had no answer. And I'm sure that that's going to be the transition and segue into a really fun Sam Vecenie rant here.
Thank you for transitioning into that for me. So Kansas State, I think, deserves a lot of credit from their coaching staff perspective. This is a team that came into this game. They thought, okay, we're going to try and get Oscar into a bunch of high ball screens. Kentucky adjusted to that early. They did some pre-switching. They, really helped out Oscar. They blitzed the ball out of Marquise Noel's hands pretty regularly. But then Kansas State did something that Alabama did really, really well, I thought, throughout the season. And it's in the second half, they adjusted from going to high ball screens to running a bit of offense and then getting Noel on the second side for a side ball screen, which is where it's a lot harder for Kentucky to be able to pre-switch or give Oscar help. And you can't really blitz side ball screens because if you do that with like an emptied side, it's just way too easy to hit that roller to a wide open spot. Or just then the roller can hit the wide open kick out to the corner. It creates way too much stress on your defense. The problem for Kentucky is that this roster is flawed to win a national title. This is a roster that can be successful in the regular season. This is not an NCAA tournament title roster. And the reason for that is kind of Oscar Tshiebwe, in my opinion. And I respect what Oscar has done. National Player of the Year last year. I didn't vote for him, but okay, that's fine. No idea how he made an All-American team this year. I know that he averaged 15 and 15 or whatever, but the guys like Oscar Tshiebwe in any level of basketball at this point are going by the wayside. And I think that's what this season showed on some level. There are very few no defense all offense or all rebounding guys that were successful in college basketball this season. Hunter Dickinson, is one that stands out. Armando Bacot stands out. Neither of those teams made the tournament. Zach Edey, his team lost in the first round. Colin Castleton is a really good defender, but his team, did not make the tournament this year. You can go kind of across the board. Trace Jackson Davis is actually a pretty good defender, but if you're relying on these bigs like this, Trace Jackson Davis just lost in the second round of the NCAA tournament, right? You can go down the list. There are very few high-level bigs remaining. One of them is Adama Sanogo, who is surrounded by the most versatile attacking defensive roster that you can build. Nobody on that team other than Hassan Diarra is under 6'4", 6'5", and they are super aggressive. They have lineup versatility. They've built that roster perfectly for Adama Sanogo to be successful. Yep. Ryan Kalkbrenner is a big that's been successful. Ryan Kalkbrenner is one of the best defenders in the country. And he does not require the ball. Ryan Kalkbrenner scores, 13, 14 a game, but he does it exceptionally efficiently and doesn't need touches. Oscar Tshiebwe, to go back to the other side of this, is someone that likes touches, crashes the offensive glass for sure, and gets a lot of his touches that way. I also think a lot of his offensive rebounds are off of his own misses, which is, inflating that number a little bit. And he crushes the defensive glass for sure, but also a big part of why he crushes the defensive glass is that he doesn't always help when he's required to help, or gets kind of pinned back by someone who is trying to just push him away from being able to protect the rim, seal him off at the basket. And he is just way too susceptible to those things. I don't think you can win a 6-game NCAA tournament, 6 games in a row, with Oscar Tshiebwe as your center. I respect everything that he has done. I do not think that you can win 6 straight games against coaching staffs that are trying to exploit every single thing that you do poorly on a night-to-night basis. When you have to play 6 different teams that have 6 different sets of skills, I don't think you can do that with Oscar Tshiebwe as your starting center. And because of that, Oscar has 1 more year left if he wants it. I don't know if he'll want it, right? Like, it feels like it's going to be, this felt like a last ride for Oscar on some level, right? I don't know that. That does not come from reporting. This is just me speculating. It just kind of felt that way to me. I don't know if I would want Oscar back if I'm Kentucky. In fact, I know that I would not want Oscar back, but I don't know if Kentucky feels that way. They probably don't feel that way, frankly. I don't blame them for not feeling that way. But we see this in the NBA. These guys like Andre Drummond that were NBA All-Stars. These guys like Nikola Vucevic. These rebounding bigs that are very limited in terms of skill set. Another thing we haven't talked about is the fact that you can't really give Oscar the ball outside of 12 feet away from the rim and expect him to make a good decision. He is not a 5-out player. He's not even really a 4-out player a lot of the time because of how much he limits your ability to handle the ball and to make plays when teams blitz your ball handlers, which is something that more and more teams do in order to get it out of high-level ball handlers' hands. We've seen this in the NBA over the course of this last modern basketball stretch. Those ideals are trickling down to college basketball. The whole thing is that coaches are trying to get you out in space. They're trying to make your life much more difficult for these bigs that can't move. Oscar has proven that he cannot defend in ball screens at this point. It's okay. He does a lot well, but it limits your ceiling as a team. And if I'm Kentucky, I am not taking a single player on my roster that I feel like limits my ceiling beyond national championship. Oscar would be great for a number of other teams that are just looking to win 20 to 25 games in a season. For Kentucky, I don't think that he actually helps them. I think he hurts their chances at a national title, despite the fact that he's averaged 20 and 20 in his 3 NCAA tournament games. But you know what happened in those 3 NCAA tournament games? In 2 of them, St. Peter's and Kansas State obliterated him in ball screens. Just crushed him. He was the entire scouting report for those teams on offense. Take advantage of it. I think that if you're Kentucky, I think the Oscar era kind of has to end.
I get it. I totally get it. And look, he's a productive player. He's a great kid, and by all accounts, a really, really hard worker. So you want to root for those guys to try to, find ways to piece it together. But at the end of the day, like, versatility is the name of the game. And over a 6-game stretch, if you're John Calipari in Kentucky, you're banking that you won't run into a team that can stretch you out on the perimeter and play 5 out during that stretch.
Or can just play ball screens.
Or can just play
like
ball screens.
Kansas State doesn't really stretch out 5 out. Like, that's not what they do. They don't even like do a crazy amount of ball screen action. Like, they do a lot of it because Marquise Noel is unbelievable, and he's really, really good. But like, they're not one of the teams that just like repeatedly, consistently attacks game after game after game like this. They're not Alabama in terms of that, but they did it today. Literally, they ran the same set again and again and again to get Oscar inside ball screens because it worked. And that's a problem. It's a real problem for Kentucky. I don't know if I have anything else to say about that. I mean, here's the other thing I will say about this. Think about this if you're Kentucky, right? The best players on this team were Casey Wallace, who's terrific, right? And I don't really have any beef. He struggled throughout the latter part of the season with injuries, but he was their best player on the court today, like, undeniably.
Yep.
And the rest of your best players are a transfer from Illinois State, a transfer from Rhode Island, a guy in Oscar who's a transfer from West Virginia, who people certainly like, but again, I just went through my argument in terms of why I think he limits your ceiling long term. Chris Livingston, who's a freshman that just wasn't quite ready, right? Lance Ware, who looks, frankly, like a mid-major player. This is why Jerome Tang was right saying Kansas State had more dudes. They did. That's the reality of the situation. So that's what Kentucky's going to get back to, something totally different next year. They have a great recruiting class coming in, led by DJ Wagner, Justin Edwards, Aaron Bradshaw, etc. I would imagine they're going to hit the transfer portal pretty hard as well. I would implore them, value roster versatility and lineup versatility and shooting and floor spacing above all. It's hard to find all of those things in one player. I get that. But value lineup versatility above all with these guys. Wings, high-level defenders, shooters. Look, Antonio Reeves was a successful guy this year for them. That was useful for them. Find more guys like that, maybe, that can also defend on top of it.
I'm with you. I think that's the modern recipe for success in the college game, and it's built by the fact that so many bigger guys are now skilled and can play away from the basket, that if you can't match up to that, you're really going to struggle.
Yeah. And frankly, like, I see a lot of John Calipari hate, like, in game as a coach. I think you blame John Calipari for the way this roster is built, for sure. But like, I don't think you have another option today, like, in game, in terms of adjustments. It's just they're limited in terms of what they can do because of what the roster looks like. And it's not hating on, well, I guess I just discussed Oscar for a while at length. I also think Severe Wheeler is a roster limiter on some level as well. But like, it's not a hate on like a lot of these individual players. It's just the way they fit together does not work in a manner that helps you win basketball games at the highest level. And Cal needs someone to get in his ear and explain this to him, I think. Otherwise, Kentucky fans are pissed, and I think that they will continue to be pissed if that doesn't change.